We are back on the Rational Boomer podcast. Hopefully, your day is going well. I got a special guest today, um, and I don't often reach out to guests and say, "Hey, would you be on the show?" Usually, it's listeners, and they'll email me, and I say, "Sure, come on." But this one, I really wanted on the show, and her name is Arlene. And if you're on TikTok, you know her as Arlene Unfiltered. She does a lot of the things I do in trying to keep people calm, except she's a former professor. She actually has some academia behind her instead of just some dumbass sitting in his living room. So, Arlene, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I was so honored when you reached out on TikTok. And uh, I have seen your videos. I'm very new to TikTok. I'm 7 days old now, and your name kept popping up. People were tagging you in a lot of comments, and so I needed to go find out who you were. And then the next thing I knew, there was a message from you in my mailbox on TikTok, and I just thought, oh wow, how great is this? So I'm completely new to all of this. So forgive me if I don't understand the lingo or how people do things or any of that, but I'm learning.
Well, it's important to understand if you don't know who Arlene is, you should check her out on TikTok. But you've been on TikTok for about a week, right?
Yeah, it's seven
Okay.
days,
Okay, 7 days. And how many followers do you have right now?
almost 100,000.
Jesus Christ. I've been here for 4 years and I'm at 350. But that tells you how people have taken to Arlene. And Arlene knows the specifics about this. And she kind of does the same thing that I'm doing, but in a more professional way and making people feel better about, what's out there. You told the story as to why you got on TikTok. I want you to tell that story again because I think it says a lot about who you are.
Sure. Um, well, well, first of all, let me clarify. I was a professor of political science like 30 years ago.
Okay.
And I stopped being a professor because I spent 2 years teaching and I was making $25,000 a year and I had a ton of student loans and I actually couldn't afford to stay being a professor. So I left that and I went into the private sector where I've spent my entire career. And so I happened to be having a conversation with a young woman who's an entrepreneur. She's probably 36, 37. She's white, she's privileged. And I don't know how the conversation came about, but she just started talking about politics and that she called herself a moderate and that she could see points on both sides. She could see points from Donald Trump and she could see points from Kamala Harris. And then she said, I don't want anyone telling me how to vote. And she was quite defiant about it. And it was in that moment that I realized she's not going to advocate for herself because she's sitting on the sidelines. She is of, reproductive age. Her reproductive rights are being severely restricted and could go away entirely. And it's as if none of this is registering to her as a young woman. And I thought there are more of her out there, which means it's possible that they won't vote or they will vote in a way that is not in their self-interest, in a way that would benefit them. And I don't know what happened in that conversation, but it was like, I'm done. And I knew in that moment, okay, I'm going to have to get involved and I'm going to go boots on the ground, excuse me, one of the battleground states, and I'll do whatever the campaign needs because I'm a Democrat. I'm voting for Kamala Harris. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to go help the campaign in whatever way I can. But the thing is I used to be a professor of political science and I've studied politics, government, and elections for the last 40 years. And so I've got this whole wealth of knowledge that has kind of just been tucked away for these past decades. And then I don't know what happened. I must have seen something somewhere about this thing called TikTok because it doesn't resonate with me. I don't even know what the thing is. And so I just opened up an account and I was just going to vent because I was so angry at her apathy. Um, And what I felt was that she's not going to vote, which means there has to be that much more work done to get these votes. And so I opened up this account on TikTok, and the first 10 videos, I was just swearing through the whole thing because I was
That's
so,
why I like you. That's why I
yeah.
like you.
Yeah, I was dropping plenty of F bombs across the board.
Nice.
I was just so fired up. And by the next day, there were like 10,000 people following me. And I'm still really fired up going into the second day, but then people started asking questions, like really basic questions about how the government operates, and a lot of stuff around, these election deniers who are being put into election positions that they're claiming they're not going to certify the elections. And people are panicking about this stuff, or this idea that the Supreme Court can just give the election to Donald Trump. And so by the third day, I was now back with my professor hat on, and I wasn't swearing anymore, because what I realized is that yes, through all of the swearing, I can educate people, but it was probably better for me to like really go back into the classroom and say, okay, here's a classroom full of people that are new to this, meaning new to politics, new to government, that like the real operation of government and how politics impacts that. And most of all, why their vote matters, because there are a lot of people who are Democrats in red states that feel like their vote doesn't matter,
Right.
or they will feel that, there's so many other people voting. Why do I need to go out and vote? And so I've done some videos where I've explained why it's vitally important for people to vote, even if they're a blue dot in a red state. I really walk them through, this is the impact of that one vote. And so all of a sudden people started saying, oh, now I realize, okay, why this is so important. And also just explaining things like, what is the Electoral College, and the different branches of government. So it really has become a classroom where we talk about how the government operates and how politics operate. And what I said from the very first day that I started on TikTok is that I called the election, that Kamala is going to win. And I started providing the evidence that I'm looking at that supports why I predict that she's going to win. And, like you, we've voted in 11 presidential elections at this point, now going into the 12th. And we have seen the ebb and flow of how the American electorate votes. And so there are certain things that are just known. For example, we know what states go red, we know what states go blue, and we know how many electoral votes that adds up to. So then it's a question, what happens in those other states? And how do you influence those things? And so what I do with most of the videos is I just answer questions. And a lot of it will be, how did we get to this point? Like Project 2025, how did it feels like it has just come out of nowhere. But when you go back to 2008 and even before that, and the appearance of these people calling themselves the Tea Party, and you start to look at how they started getting themselves elected very quietly in all these different places, people look at those things in isolation and never actually zoom out and say, what are the overall implications of these people
Right.
getting into different positions? And now all of a sudden we've got Donald Trump in office, and the Heritage Foundation producing Project 2025 as a blueprint to basically take over the government.
You made a good point there. How do we get here? Now, I have a contention as to how we got here, and I'll see if you
Mhm.
concur with that or you straighten me out. You mentioned apathy, and we've had apathy in this country for decades and decades. And
Yeah.
most normal politicians understand how you can take a frog and put him in a boiling water or
Yes.
cold water and let it boil, and it slowly kills the frog because it
Yeah.
happens so slowly. Donald Trump comes into the fray, and he is a virulent virus that all of a sudden
Yeah.
ramps everything up, and everybody's going, "Holy shit! How did
Yeah.
this happen?" Well, this happened because we let it happen. Now
Yeah.
that's why it's incumbent on somebody like you or me or anybody else in this country to actually realize what's going on. And I think the thing that upsets you is the thing that upsets me is people are ill or misinformed. They
Yeah,
don't have the motivation to find out the truth. And secondly, the media isn't our friend. They're not trying to make us feel better or understand. They're trying to whip us up into a fervor so
yes.
that they can gain more viewers. For an uneducated guy, am I on track there?
You're absolutely right. I think there's another piece to it that I would add into it. Yes, there is the apathy, there is the feeling among the electorate that their vote doesn't count because they don't see their vote in the context of overall elections. And the other part of it is the flip side of it is there's the voter side, but then there is the other side where it's the people who are running for office and the extreme conservative views that they hold. And it's like they infiltrate. And what they do is they start locally where no one else is going to notice that they're there because in local elections, almost no one votes or a very small percentage vote. And so you'll get somebody who runs for a school board in a town or in a small city. And then they'll be on the board of county commissioners. And then they'll be on the library board. And they start with these low level, they're not president, they're not governor, they're not senator, and all of that. They're like in these local communities where they get themselves voted in because nobody else is paying attention. And then all of a sudden, people are deciding what books are going to be in libraries. And then everybody gets all in a tizzy about it, but it happened right in front of their face, but they
Right.
didn't realize what was actually going to happen as a result of those people with those views being elected into those positions. And so, for as much apathy as there is, I mean, we see, and you and I have both seen this, that the voter turnout goes up and down over the decades. It's just a normal part of politics and voter participation. But the more dangerous thing is that if people get voted into office, like for example, you could be in a town and there's a vote and there'll be 63 people vote for the extreme conservative and 22 people or no people vote for the other person because they don't think that those elections matter. And the problem with those people getting into those positions is they start building a base. They build a coalition of support. They build name recognition such that all of a sudden they're running for Congress or
Right.
they're running for Senate. And this is what happened when the people among the Tea Party, which had no leader and no organized organization behind them of such, is that all of a sudden these people appeared in the Senate and the House of Representatives, and they started saying things that we had never heard come out of the mouths of politicians. And that was, I believe, the real beginning of the journey to what ultimately we saw Donald Trump in 2016. This was all happening right in front of our eyes, but because it started locally and then grew over different election cycles, these people just worked their way up and kept getting elected into positions where they were ultimately going to pose a threat to our democracy.
There's one topic I want to, this is kind of departing from what we're talking about here, but
Mhm.
the one thing that caught my attention about your videos. Now, when I'm looking for news stories, whether watching the news or going on the internet or watching TikToks, I don't watch whole news stories.
Yeah,
What I do is I look for the story that interests me, that I think is important, and then I go dive into other areas that I trust to corroborate what that information is. And if I can't do that, I don't talk about it.
right.
You're about and I came across one of your videos one of the first times I saw you, and I watched the whole thing. And I've since watched the whole thing of every video that you put out because there is a lot of information. And there's a question I get and it annoys the shit out of me, and they know it annoys the shit out of me because it's they're just buying into the bullshit. But it's his story, And you did a video on it. And I just want you to kind of reiterate this, a video about all these people. We've got all this positivity going on with Kamala. She's on a roll. She's got momentum. She's got everything. And then, of course, Rachel Maddow or somebody else comes out. Oh, what about those 70 election deniers? They're going to ruin it for us all, and Donald Trump's going to win, which is absolutely bullshit. But I've never heard a better explanation about it than what you gave on TikTok. So please let these folks know so they can shut the fuck up about it.
Sure. Well, I had, like you certainly have all the time, people sending you videos and asking you what you think about it. And someone said that Rachel Maddow had done a segment on her show where she was talking about, well, the segment started with her talking about Donald Trump saying that, you don't need to vote. I've got all the votes. You don't need to vote. And what Rachel Maddow did in her segment, well, what I did in the video is I actually deconstructed the segment, because she alarmed a lot of people, and I'm sure this happened to you, that a lot of people writing to me completely freaked out, telling me that they couldn't even sleep that night because the segment they saw on the Rachel Maddow show scared them to death. And what she was intimating in the segment was that Donald Trump was telling people he didn't need them to vote because he was going to, that he somehow had some secret plan to just take the election and take away America and our democracy and everything else. And then she was talking about the Rolling Stone article that was referencing these 70 election deniers who were now in election official capacity. And so the person who reached out to me said, can you tell me what you think of this? And I wrote back to the person and I said, I actually made a video and I said, look, this is how it works in terms of certifying elections and so forth. And I don't know what it was. It just kind of was bugging me a little bit after I made that video. And I thought, you know what, let me go back and look more closely at this video segment. And I actually deconstructed it where I looked at it, I turned the sound off and I watched Rachel Maddow's face and the raised eyebrows, the tilted head, the lighting, and how long it took in between when she stopped talking and then when she started talking again. And then I looked at, okay, what were the segments that she used? What were the video clips that she was using to support what she was saying? Because what she did in the beginning of the story, let me give you basically the segment in its totality here. Rachel Maddow starts out talking about that Donald Trump has said that you don't need to vote. He's speaking to his audience. And then she squirrels her head up and has these facial expressions. And she leans forward into the camera and said, now that's kind of a weird thing to say, that you don't need people to vote because maybe you're planning something. Well, Donald Trump did not say that in the video that she played.
Right.
What he was doing was all of this bluster that he
Right.
always has. He's a narcissist. He loves media attention. And so, and he says incendiary, provocative things because it gets a rise out of people and it means he dominates the news cycle. And so she played the clip of him being, wherever he was on his campaign stop. And then she says, there are a lot of weird things in this campaign. And then she proceeds to give 3 examples that were just really extreme things that had absolutely nothing to do with Donald Trump saying, you don't need to vote because we've got all the votes we need. So then she brings it back and says, so it is really kind of weird to tell people you don't need the vote. And then immediately switches over to, and in the Rolling Stone article, they talked about 70 election deniers. And you listen to the pacing of how she's delivering the information. And it's starting to scare the viewer because it's like, what's happening? What's happening? And she's actually fear mongering. She's stoking the
Right.
fear in people. And so she's saying, The Rolling Stone article is talking about the 70 election deniers that have been put into these election official capacities. Well, this has been known. This is not news. These people have been there, they've been out there, and they were causing trouble back in the 2020 election. And then she goes on to say, and 22 of them are known to have refused to certify the vote. And then she introduces yet another piece of authority from someone who says that, yes, this is, going to create chaos and all of this. And I'm like, why are you saying all of this stuff? And so then it comes back to her talking, just her as a talking head. And she says, and so what we know is that the election this time is not going to happen like normal or like it has in the past, or we can't expect the election to take place in the way that you would normally expect it. And then she says, a complete switch, she says, and are they ready for in this kind of serious tone, are they ready for the juggernaut that is going to be coming? And then I couldn't make out the rest of the video. What she was saying is that, are they ready for the juggernaut, which is this huge mass momentum of people going in the direction of Kamala Harris? And are they going, meaning Donald Trump and his campaign, are they going to be ready for it? And so I looked at the whole thing. This took probably 4.5 minutes for her to do this entire segment. And what she didn't do at the very end, which was very irresponsible of her, is that you stoke all of this fear in people and you don't give them any way of feeling like they have any power.
Right.
She didn't say, she did not go back and clarify, which I did in the video I did, the one that I said how Rachel Maddow scared her audience. What she didn't do is she didn't go and explain how it is that there are mechanisms in place that at all levels within the states where your vote is being cast, that there are ways to compel those elections officials to certify the results. Now, if people knew how these elections worked and how the votes are counted and the conditions that have to be met to refuse to certify an election, and that the top elections official in the state is the governor, and there are penalties that can be assessed to these elections officials, some of which are financial. Like there are so many provisions, so many protections in place to force these people to certify the elections that, and the proof is in 2020, where everyone is claiming that the election is being stolen, you do realize that all of those elections were ultimately certified.
Right.
So
Right.
now she's stoking the flames by putting out this information. And I can't tell you the number of creators on TikTok and elsewhere who have picked up this story about the election deniers and the Rolling Stone article, and people are completely freaked out.
Yeah.
But the truth is, you don't have to be freaked out by that, because they were not successful in the last election, and they don't suddenly manufacture new ways of saying that, these results aren't valid, because the bottom line is that all of the results will be checked. If there's a valid reason to not certify an election, meaning there are a whole bunch of missing ballot boxes, or the machines in a certain congressional district broke down or didn't show up, or somebody stole them or something. I mean, these really extreme, ridiculous things that pretty much don't happen. You don't have to worry about it. This stuff is in the media because it keeps people glued to their televisions and to social media, and it keeps them afraid. And the irresponsible thing on the part of Rachel Maddow is that she did not bring the story to a close and make clear that those elections in 2020 were certified. She didn't make clear that there are provisions in place to make it so that those people will have to certify those elections. She also didn't make clear that in the places where people were refusing to certify elections, that it may have been the case that the elections were very, very close and they wanted a recount. And so there are all kinds of things that go into this, but she didn't say anything about
Yeah.
any of them. She didn't leave people with this feeling of, oh, okay, yes, this is happening. Yes, these people are out there. This is what they are saying they're going to do. And this is what happens when things like that happen. And she should know better because she's a Rhodes Scholar. She has a PhD to my knowledge. I mean, she's been an academic. She didn't used to do this stuff on her show when she first got her
Right,
show. And
right,
over
exactly.
time, and this is why I don't watch her anymore, is that over time there has been a sort of a devolving of how she's presenting the information and her analysis of it. It is becoming more a part of just creating the drama around stuff, and
Right.
that is what is doing the disservice to the American people.
I can break it down with a simple mind. You're the academic, and I thank you for explaining it. I think this helps a lot of people. For those that are a little slower, like myself, I'll try to break it down this way. You tell me if I'm right. First of all, if you know anything about narcissists, they talk in extremes all the time.
Yeah,
It's either the
totally.
worst or the best.
Yeah,
And people keep insisting that Donald Trump is some brilliant mind. He is not. He's got to be one of the dumbest individuals I've ever heard speak. And when he says you don't even have to vote, what he's really saying is, I'm so great. I'm so good. I got this locked up. Don't even worry about it. He's not really
yeah,
telling them not to vote. He's just
yeah,
trying to put on this presence as he's confident about it.
yeah,
And and and
absolutely.
and the other part of it is you talk about the 70 deniers, election deniers. Um, you gave a perfect explanation of that. But in simpler terms, I will say, look, this all happened. The same shit happened in 2020. Donald Trump was in power. The Republicans had power, and it didn't work. What makes you
Yeah.
think it's going to get any worse? Because they're not doing it. Not people say, "Will he cheat in 2024?" Fuck yeah, he's going to cheat. That's how he does business. But they're going to try it in 2024, and it's going to have even less effect because people know it's coming, they're preparing for it, and they know how to fight against it. And the public is not going to buy the bullshit a second time as much as they
Yeah.
did in 2020. Am I on track there?
You are absolutely correct. And I would only add just one thing to this to help people further understand why they can relax about these people who are out there, creating all this chaos and drama, is that in 2020, claiming the election was stolen and that, Donald Trump was robbed and all of this is all about the transfer of power. This is about transferring the power from one president to the president that has just been elected. And that was from Donald Trump to Joe Biden. And that was going to be a massive shift for all of those Trump supporters, and that they can't allow this to happen. And the way we're going to prevent this is by not certifying the elections. But the reality in 2024 is that Joe Biden is the president, and he will be transferring that power to Kamala Harris, the person he said he thought would make a great president. I'm not using his words literally. It's like he steps aside and says Kamala Harris is the right person for this job. So, for the powers that be, and the American public, nobody is objecting to the transfer of power going from Joe Biden to Kamala Harris, because there isn't this extreme difference between the current president and the next president that we will be electing. And so the conditions in 2024 were very, very different. These people will absolutely be out there. There's a lot going on right now where people are talking about how their name has been taken off the voter registration roll. And I just want to touch on this for a second because this is happening a lot in Georgia, because Georgia passed a law that makes it possible for pretty much anyone to claim that someone else's voter registration isn't valid and that they are not eligible to vote. And they go to a website and enter that person's information, like their name and their address, or even just an address. And the funny thing is everybody's getting really wigged out about this. And yes, it's important. You need to be checking your voter registration. You can check it online for your state. Um, you literally have to check it every day between now and the election to make sure that you're still showing up on the voter registration list. But the thing that I find kind of funny is that, you know, this law was passed in Georgia. And so now everyone's getting all frantic about the fact that, these voter registration rolls are being, cleansed of so many people. And presumably they're cleaning it of all Democrats. But
Right.
here's the thing, anybody can go enter somebody's address. Why, why is you as a Democrat, wouldn't you just drive down the street and wherever there's a Trump sign, you enter the address and say that they're not eligible to vote? I mean, come on. This is all political strategy here. It's like, I can't say that I would do that, but it kind of seems like, well, if they're going to do it, why wouldn't the opposing side do it?
And that's always been my problem with Republicans. They do all these things and they don't look past the end of their nose. Like this immunity thing with Donald Trump. They're trying to get him off the hook, so the Supreme Court gives him this immunity thing. Uh, but in essence, they gave Joe Biden immunity.
Yes,
Now,
that's exactly right.
now, people will constantly say, and I will fight against this. I never thought Joe Biden should step aside. I thought he would win because I think this is more about not about who's more popular, but who hates Donald Trump more. There's a big push of people who hate him and terrified of him. They'd vote for a ham sandwich over him. But Joe Biden, for as slow as he is, I think as a politician, he's a diabolical mastermind. I mean, how else could he get more things done in 4 years, this poor, decrepit guy, than any other president in history? Who else could decide to step aside after the RNC convention and put
Yeah.
them in a tizzy? And then also realize that some people in the Democratic Party, the elites, as he would say, want to jump over Kamala, which would be an absolute disaster. So instead of just saying, I'm stepping aside, he waits an hour and he says, oh, yeah, I'm endorsing Kamala. And then the ball starts rolling. No one can tell me Joe Biden didn't plan this out. He may be the smartest man in Washington, D.C. because of his experience, and he may be slow, but don't get fooled by that.
Well, I think that Joe Biden is a brilliant politician. He is he is a man of integrity. And for, I mean, anybody who runs for office at that level has to have a really healthy ego.
Yeah,
And anybody who becomes the president, I mean, there have only been 46 of them. And, 46 guys to date, of all of the people that have lived in the United States since the founding of the country. There've only been 46 of these guys, right? So he gets elected, fully intends to run for a second term. I don't believe there's even a thought in his head at any point along the way that he would not be running and win his second term. And I think that his performance at the debate, I actually think it took a long time for him to acknowledge that it was a problem, because anybody who has a really healthy ego is never going to be thinking that they really messed up. And he did. And he created a level of insecurity among the American public and, quite frankly, internationally, about, what his mental state was at the time. And there was no recovering from it. You can't be on a national stage like that and have a performance such that he did and recover. And I think that I I wouldn't go as far as you do in thinking that he was the mastermind behind this. I think that, as the expression goes, the planets just aligned
true,
in a moment and set this whole thing in motion.
true.
And we can see the sort of like a behind the scenes architecting of this and how it all turned out. But I think it's actually the reverse. It all turned out a certain way, which makes it look like this was all planned. And that is really, really satisfying, because there wasn't enough time between the moment at which he was starting to consider that maybe this was a problem, because this was quite some time after that debate. I don't think he was sitting in the White House sort of architecting, oh, we're just going to move Kamala into this position kind of thing. I think up until the night that he wrote up his speech about that he was going to step aside. I think he was tremendously conflicted. And I
Oh,
think the American people were sitting there with bated breath because if he if he doesn't step aside, what happens to the election? And I think that I predicted, prior to that, like as soon as I saw the debate, I predicted that Donald Trump would win simply
really?
because if he stayed in the race and this was his condition, everybody has to look at what are the next 4 years going to look like. Um, I think Donald Trump would have won because Democrats would have felt defeated as a result of what they saw in that debate, and a large portion of them would have been resigned to the fact that Donald Trump is going to be in office and may not have turned out at the polls. And what happened instead is that he did the most he did the most heroic thing an American could do, is
Right.
to lay down his political life for his country. And so the whole, as Rachel, I'll use Rachel Maddow's word, the whole juggernaut, it took off the second it became apparent that Kamala Harris was going to be the nominee, and it just exploded. And that train has left the station.
Yeah. I can't disagree with any of that. I will say this too, over and above the fact that he was slow, he had a bad performance, he was maybe sick or, maybe diminished in some way. I
Hmm.
think one of the problems too with this is there was a mismatch in personalities.
Totally.
Meaning, when you got a guy that's kind of a bulldozer,
Yeah.
you need to match that energy. And Joe, whether he was young or old, he was more laid back, more
Yeah.
defensive. And when you're dealing with a bully or somebody of that nature, what I've learned over the years is you got to match the energy. You got to
That's right.
stand up to them because that's the only thing that pushes them back. And you
Yeah.
got to be willing to slap the taste out of their mouth. And
That's exactly right.
Joe's not that kind of guy, no matter how
That's right.
old he is. And I think that's why when people finally realize that it's now going to be Kamala, because there was no huge support for her before this
That's
whole
right.
thing happened. It
That's
just
correct.
happened like that. And they
Yeah.
realized that she's a warrior, she can fight back.
That's exactly right.
And that's the hope they got out of this.
Absolutely. And the thing with the Democratic Party is, um, you know, for as long as I can remember, the big problem with the Democratic Party has always been that they won't fight.
Right,
They don't come out swinging. And the Republicans, once they have picked their horse in the race, they rally around that person and they come out swinging. And the
right.
Democrats have never done that because they've always been wanting to be everybody is welcome in the party, everybody is welcome under this, big giant umbrella. But there's always so much infighting because there are so many issues that need to be resolved in our society. And those issues are they reveal themselves among the people who are in the Democratic Party. There are a lot of people who need different things, and the Democratic Party will do the best they can to represent those people. But the problem is that those people will fight with one another instead of turning their attention and fighting against who their enemy is.
Yeah,
And this is the very first time that I've been aware of politics and elections since I was young in the 60s, that I have seen the Democrats do exactly what the Republicans do. They don't even care who the candidate is. They rally around the candidate that is the person who's going to go forward, and they come out fighting. And the beautiful thing about Kamala Harris is that she's a prosecutor. She will be the law and order president, and she will come out swinging. And as I said in one of my videos, she's like a sledgehammer. And that
right.
is exactly what the Democrats need in order to defeat Donald Trump, because as you say, his kind of personality, all of that bluster, his narcissism, you've got to have somebody who is so powerful in their own right, in whatever way or in whatever shape or form that takes. They have to have that to be able to go up against him, because what I see is that he's kind of like the Wizard of Oz, and he's just this little man inside what appears to be this big thing.
Right.
And Kamala Harris is like the longer we go as we get closer and closer to the election, the more he's going to expose him as being like the Wizard of Oz. And he demonstrated that in his appearance before the National Association of Black Journalists, and the things that came out of his mouth, those were directed. He doesn't care what he says. He only cares that he gets the attention.
Right.
And he said what he had to say because he knew it would take up space in the news cycle and that his base would absolutely love it. And so I mean, and he revealed himself. He is like the Wizard of Oz, that anybody who has to resort to talking in the way that he does about his opponent means that he doesn't have anything else to throw at them. And
I have
so he's going to find himself. I mean, if he chooses to debate her, I think he's going to find himself in a whole world of hurt because she's going to eviscerate him on the stage.
Absolutely. And I've often said on the show and in the TikToks, in an inelegant way, just let Donnie talk. He will implicate himself or he will fuck himself up.
Yeah.
And he's just got to get the room. We got a lot to talk about on the other side. We're going to take a break here in a minute. The one
Okay.
thing I want to say about Kamala, I believe
Mhm.
when you said the planets are aligning, I'm a big believer in destiny and like
Yeah.
cycles. We've gone
Yeah.
through a dark period for 8 years. It's
Yeah.
destined for us to come out the other side. We
Yeah.
always
I
did
agree.
that in the 60s. We had Vietnam and the
Yeah.
protest, but we came out and we thought the world was going to end then. And we come out in
Yes,
the
we did.
70s and things get bright again. So it's inevitable we're going to do that. And it looks like we're in that situation. The thing that makes me believe in destiny more, here's a black South Asian woman who, like you say, is a sledgehammer, but she
Hmm.
does not come off as an angry black woman or a bitchy woman.
Yeah.
People love her in addition to her strength. And I think
Yeah.
that's the changing of the times. We need a fighter now, and that's what's giving people hope. And they love her, but they know she's going to kick some ass.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100% on that. As you said earlier, I mean, she was out there running for office previously, and, people didn't seem to take to her. They took
Yeah,
to other candidates for whatever reason. But I don't think that this is about Kamala Harris specifically. I think it is, there are so many factors at play, and she's the perfect person for the
I agree.
moment. No matter that people may not have liked her or wanted to vote for her in the past, this is the moment where Kamala Harris makes the most sense in American history for dozens and dozens of
Right.
reasons.
Well, and I tell people too, when you look at 2016, 2020, and now 2024, we're on different parallel universes. The world is totally different. When
Completely.
Kamala was running in 2020, we had George Floyd, and everybody hated the cops, and we
Yeah.
hated the tough black woman. Now she's our
Yeah.
savior because that's exactly what we need.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed.
She's an interesting study. I tell you what, Arlene, we're going to take a quick break. So we
Okay.
got to do what old people do. And people know what I'm saying. I always just tell them I'm going to the bathroom and getting some water. So they
Fair
know.
enough. Fair enough. Fair enough.
We're many things on the Rational Boomer podcast, but classy ain't one of them.
Beautiful.
All right. We will take a quick break and we will be right back.
Beautiful.
We are back on the Rational Boomer podcast. We have the great pleasure of Arlene from Arlene Unfiltered on TikTok. She is a former professor of political science. She knows her shit. It's not just some clown sitting in his living room talking off the top of his head. She knows what she's talking about. But we come from the same era. The 60s is when we started school through the 70s. Um, and there's all the talk about forgiving student loans, and obviously you went through some shit. You got your student loans, and the academia that that you created these loans in weren't wasn't willing to pay you enough to pay the goddamn things back. But I'm amazed by how some people just are willing to not pay attention to what's going on. And I've said, kind of tongue in cheek and kind of serious, that we have a crisis in this country. Since the emergence of Donald Trump, the biggest crisis that's been revealed to me is we've got a epidemic of stupid in this country. People that just don't get anything, don't take the time, don't have the motivation to learn anything. And that's why I've said, in every crisis, America pours money into it to fix it, a
Mhm.
hurricane, a earthquake, or
Yeah.
fire, or whatever. Uh, Having a bunch of stupid people in your country, that's kind of a crisis. We should not only forgive loans, we should send as many people to school for free to try to raise the level of intelligence and awareness in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. When you look at other countries and you look at their education systems, you look at their healthcare, other basic needs that people have, it really determines the outcomes of those societies and how
Right,
they move forward as a country. Um, and for those countries that have things like free education, where you go to university and you don't pay for it, you go to the emergency room and you don't pay for it, you have a much healthier and a much more educated populace who are able to make more informed decisions about what needs to happen, and they're more informed when they go into the voting booth. And because because of the way that um, politicians have characterized universal health care as being the big bad evil red socialism, and all of the, like, they're just throwing things around.
right,
um, they don't know what they're talking about, but because they've got the buzzwords and people don't educate themselves about what these things are, that people just jump on the bandwagon. If you hear something enough, like in advertising, if you say something enough, if you show the same ad enough times, people will remember the brand name so that when they go to the store, that's the product that they buy because it's the only one that they're familiar with. And so when we talk about universal health care in particular, where this means that everyone has access to health care, and in particular, they don't pay for it. Uh, like, Hillary Clinton was always talking about the need for everyone to have health care. And when Bill Clinton was first elected, that was one of the things that she was first working on. She is, I think it's been noted that she's actually a smarter and better lawyer than Bill Clinton.
oh, I'm
And
sure.
she knows policy inside and out. And she's a serious person when it comes to women and children. And so, when they first got into the White House, basically there was this huge backlash against Hillary Clinton because she was talking about healthcare in a way that everyone was afraid, like it's bad for everyone to have healthcare, because they were, the right was throwing around all kinds of words about it. And she got hammered because she was trying to do something good for all of the people in the country, and that
Right.
was in the form of health care. And then here comes Obama, and he introduces the Affordable Care Act, which, was designed to get more people affordable health care, where they would still have to pay something for the health care, meaning their insurance. Um, and therefore, you'd have, 40 million more people who you know, have health insurance and aren't going to the emergency room for their care. And then hospitals have this huge percentage of uncompensated care that they're providing because they've got people who are coming in, they don't have any health insurance, and nobody pays for the care that those people are getting. But the problem when Obama came up with the Affordable Care Act is the name on its own was perfectly fine. It's just that the right started calling it Obamacare.
Right.
And because there was a tremendous amount of racism sitting behind all of that, it stoked all of the racist feelings in white people across America, feelings that they would never even acknowledge it existed. But we learn racism like as soon as we can be aware of what's going on in our household because we
Right.
hear words in our houses. The issue was as soon as they started calling the Affordable Care Act Obamacare, and the right, the Republican Party did this, all of a sudden everybody's saying, we don't want Obamacare, we don't want Obamacare, not even knowing what it was. And there were studies done where when you would ask people if they believed in the Affordable Care Act, they would say, yes, absolutely, we need to have that. And then they would be asked, do you think we should have Obamacare? Absolutely not.
Right, right.
Exactly the same thing.
Well, the Republicans over the decades have done and I hate to say masterful job, but that's kind of what it's
They are
been.
at it.
Masterful job of saying health, we pay a lot of taxes, right? And these
Yep.
people are supposed to be working for us. Our government is supposed to work for us. But they've been able to convince people to say healthcare, education, Medicare, Social Security, we can't afford that. But at the same time, they can say, let's give $2 trillion tax credit to wealthy people who don't need the money and put
Yeah.
$1 trillion into the defense fund, which we don't need to do. That's a good
Yeah.
idea. But helping the people doing the very job they were put in place to do, that's bad because we can't afford it. You're just going to
Yeah.
bankrupt this country. It's
Hmm.
absolute bullshit. If
Yeah.
wealthy people paid their taxes and we didn't waste money on ridiculous shit that's unnecessary, we could afford all this stuff. And the
Yeah.
only reason the Republicans don't want to do it is because it makes the Democrats look good.
Yeah. I think, a perfect example of this is how it ever became the case that union workers ever voted for Donald Trump,
Yeah.
that like Trump doesn't want there to be unions. He's not in favor of the unions. And yet there are so many members of unions that don't realize that the reason they have a pension, the reason they have the healthcare plans they do, the reason they have protections in their jobs is all because of their unions. And yet a a very significant number of union members uh, have voted for Donald Trump, who
Right.
will bust a union whenever he has the opportunity to.
Yeah.
And so it is really this thing of, it's kind of like the cult of personality. When you talk about a guy who comes off of TV in The Apprentice in the form of Donald Trump, and you've seen it, you saw it back in the 80s when he came on the scene, and he was the big Donald Trump developer, and he's developing all of these properties. And in the meantime, he's leveraged to the hilt. He's borrowing money like crazy to put his name on all these buildings that he's building, and casinos and airlines and universities, all these things that he started that ultimately we've shown have failed.
Every one of
Um,
them. Yeah.
he actually is a failed businessman, but because he has been able to craft, he's a master at marketing himself, and he presents himself in a way that things are self-evident. It is so self-evident that he is this God. He
Right.
is he is the best. Everything is in the superlative with him. He
Right.
is the best of things. It's not that he's better. He is the best. He has the biggest rallies. He has the most money raised. He's the most successful businessman since the world was created. And people buy into that stuff, and then they will act in a way that is not in their own self-interest. And so now we've come to a moment where it is becoming more and more apparent that people are unhappy with Donald Trump. They don't want him anymore. And they have discovered that he is the Wizard of Oz,
Right.
which is why we are seeing this massive groundswell of support for Kamala Harris, part of which was motivated by the statements of J.D. Vance about childless women. And now you've basically alienated pretty
Everybody.
much every woman in America.
Well, I have a contention about 2016. See if you think.
Mm-hmm.
I think there should have been red flags to both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party in 2016 when what happened happened. I think Hillary Clinton wasn't the most likable, but more importantly, I think she represented establishment politics and people
Yes.
were tired of this shit.
Yeah.
And Donald Trump comes along and he appears to be their champion, the tough guy out there fighting, the John Wayne guy. I'm going to take it to the government. And they thought, what could go wrong? we can get out of the bullshit that we're dealing with right now and have this champion fight for us, somebody actually willing to fight for us. And they
Yeah.
took a flyer and they fucked up and we made the wrong choice.
Yeah.
But with all these people, these narcissistic people who have these grandiose and delusional ideas and they pitch this to them. I mean, I saw it in small towns. There was a guy who lived in our small town who was very wealthy. He owned a
Hmm.
collection agency or a series of collections. He's just a despicable piece of shit. I did not like the guy. And they'd all talk shit about him behind his back, but when he was around, they were deferential to him because, oh,
Yep.
he's rich.
Totally.
He's somebody to look up to. And that's what
Yep.
Donald Trump was. And he played off that, and we all got played by that. And
Yeah.
and and now, as is the case with every narcissist, they have their rise, and it's pretty impressive. But they always
Yeah.
come to the peak, and they all start sliding down, and the cracks become revealed. I say this about my father from a distance. My father looked brilliant, looked charismatic, looked successful, but he never
Yeah.
had close friends.
Yeah.
And all the people in his family knew exactly who he was and were disgusted by it. And now we're coming to that point with Donald Trump. He looked like this hero and people bought into it, but now they're going, holy fuck, this guy's a piece of
Yeah.
shit.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think your analysis of that is spot on. I think that, going back to the situation with Hillary Clinton, I actually didn't think that Hillary Clinton was going to win because if you look throughout history at election cycles and you look at what's happening in society, you look at what's happening in the economy, you look at it in its total, it was time for Donald Trump. The
Yeah,
country needed, not the country, there was a certain segment of the population that needed a Donald Trump. And I'm sure you can remember there was the period of time where we were starting to get rumblings that there were these white supremacist groups kind of, out in the
yeah.
woods in Idaho and other places.
Montana,
But
yeah.
yeah, they were just isolated, and you'd hear about them in the news every so often, and you really didn't think much because you just thought that these were just people, with guns,
Just
making the
wackos out in the
Heil,
middle of nowhere.
yeah, yeah, their Heil Hitler salutes and having their little camps and so forth, not realizing that there were many, many more of them than we knew about. It was just what exposure they got, like they had been there all along, and it was kind of like the underbelly of America. And that's like in the extreme. But then, we've got all of these other people who have some of the same feelings. And it's just sort of this kind of pyramid where you've got the basis of the base all the way up to here's Donald Trump, and every person who's got some kind of grievance about something, uh, gravitating to Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is he is, I have never seen anyone be more of a master of the grievance,
Right.
because when you look at Donald Trump, it's everyone else's fault. It's never him. He is not the
It's
failure. It
silly
will not
after a
be.
while.
That's
It's
right. It's not
ridiculous.
right. It's not like he's going to lose this election in his mind. It will be that someone else did something.
Right.
He will claim that the election was stolen from him, as he did in 2020. It's always going to be about him. But the thing is that America, a big portion of America was ready for Donald Trump. There just hadn't been anyone charismatic enough or bombastic enough that they could fall in behind. And the second he was on The Apprentice, people loved him from The Apprentice because he seemed like this big, tough, you know, uh, uh, businessman. And they figured, oh, this is the guy that could run America. And we'd had the time of Obama and the amount of racism that existed there because people were resisting the idea that we would ever have a black president. And so, Hillary Clinton running against Donald Trump, I looked at it and said, no matter how many people are supporting Hillary Clinton, there is a whole contingent of Republicans out there that are chomping at the bit to get this guy. And there were so many women who voted for him and also voted for him in 2020.
Yeah.
Um, and the thing with Hillary is that she just had so many things uh, against her. she was up against so much going into that election that regardless of the popular vote that she got, she didn't have the popular vote in enough states that
Right.
she could have won that election. And in a sense, it was kind of an indictment of Hillary Clinton. It was a total blowback by certain groups of people in America against her. And there you end up with Donald Trump. And then, as we see in history, you and I both have lived it through now 12 presidential election cycles, that the pendulum always swings. It
Right.
swings in Congress, it swings in the Senate, it swings in the presidency. The only place it doesn't swing is in the Supreme Court. And that is where we have real problems.
Yeah. Well, and that's where I feel like we are now with that swinging of the pendulum. It goes bad for a while, but it's always got to go good. And I get that sense
Yeah,
because you look at Donald Trump, he was the media darling. He was the one creating the monkey dancing and the shit show, and the
yeah,
media focused on him.
yeah, totally.
Now Kamala has kind of taken over that spot, and he's kind of on the downside. And this is
Totally.
one of the things that's going to carry her over to win. Somebody said to me, you say Kamala's going to win or Joe Biden's going to win. Did you predict Donald Trump would win in 2016? And I say, as a matter of fact, I did. I won
Yeah.
$200 saying he was going to win. And I was talking
Yeah.
to a Republican who didn't have the confidence to think he was going to win. I just sensed the tone of the country and the
Yeah.
media and all this
Yeah.
stuff, and he was going to win. And at the time, Hillary wasn't a great candidate for that moment. She might have
Right.
been a great president, but at that moment, it wasn't going to
That's
work.
right.
But now we're
That's right.
seeing Donald Trump eating shit and Kamala getting momentum.
That's right.
I don't know if
And
you heard.
no,
Uh,
sorry, please go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, you talking about the way everything's grandiose about him.
Yeah.
He did something the other day. Now, this show may not air till Monday, so I don't want to talk about old news. But Kamala Harris has the debate coming up in September, and he's trying to back out of it, right?
Right.
Okay, he's saying they already know me. He's making excuses. Well,
Yeah.
now, of course, people are calling him chicken and whatever, that he doesn't have the guts to do it. And that is the worst thing you can do to a narcissist. That is the worst thing to happen to a narcissist if you think
Yep.
they're weak or whatever. So he comes out. Initially, he said, well, I won't do it on ABC, but I'll do it on Fox. And everybody goes, shut the fuck up. You got a contract.
Yep.
He came out. We're recording this on Saturday. He came out today and he said, well, I've agreed to a debate on Fox News on September 4th. When they went to Kamala Harris's camp, nobody said a word. When they went to Fox News, nobody said a word. And people are thinking, oh my God, they're going to have the debate. He made this shit up to divert
Yep.
from the pain he's getting by being a chicken. And
Yep.
he's making it up and it's not real. So he's hoping Kamala says, no, I'm not doing that. I'm doing it on in ABC on September 18th or 10th or whatever it is.
Right.
And it's just a diversion. But he th-
Completely.
but people have figured out his game now. They're already
That's right.
starting to expose that this is stupid bullshit.
Yep. I totally agree with you. And it reminds me of something I saw. It's probably been within the last 2 weeks where there was a video clip of him saying that I'm paraphrasing, but it was him saying something like, there's nothing I hate more than people laughing at me.
Oh, I know.
Remember that?
Yep.
And
I know the personality type, so I know how bad they
yes,
hate it.
like that you would actually acknowledge that that's like your weak spot. It's his kryptonite, actually. And so what has been very interesting is I think it was Tim Waltz who started
The
he
weird
was
thing.
the weird thing. He
Yeah.
just said it casually, and all of a sudden it completely took off. And I think that, like, when you see Republicans, especially on social media, they become apoplectic when people are calling them weird. And I'm not talking about what we know, you and I know as real Republicans, the
Yeah.
Republican Party that we would love to see again. It's among the other element, the fringe element, the MAGAs. They can't deal with this thing of being called weird. It is a very peculiar kind of thing because, like, we use that word all the time. Oh, that's weird. but
Yeah.
somehow it is resonating because it others them. It means it puts them outside of everyone else, and they are so desperate to be part of something, to be included, to be affiliated with, uh, that this othering that is caused by calling them weird, I think is having a huge impact on them, and it's actually quite destabilizing for them.
Oh, it
And
is.
so I think that, I saw what you did about Donald Trump claiming that he had, talked to Fox News, and it intimated that it was an agreement between him and Fox News, and Kamala Harris was not even part of the equation. They just decided that they were going to do this.
And I don't
And
think
I
Fox
thought,
News was
oh,
involved either.
yeah, no, I don't either. I think he manufactured this like many things, and it shows up in the news and it takes up, more airtime. But the reality is between now and November, what is the news cycle going to be made up of? And right now, it's completely dominated by Kamala Harris and who's she going to pick for VP. And so that will come early this next week. And then you will have the Democratic National Convention where Joe Biden is going to be the featured speaker. And then Kamala Harris, she already has enough delegate votes to be announced as the nominee.
Right.
And there'll be all of this excitement at the convention. It'll be covered for probably, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 nights, however long that convention lasts. That'll dominate the news. So now we're going into the latter part of August. That'll be taken up with, you know, talk about Joe Biden and his performance and what a great president he's been and all this other stuff. And now we're moving closer and closer to September, and all of a sudden early voting is starting. And now there's going to be talk about all of that. And then the state races and so forth. I think that she owns the news cycle from here all the way to the election,
I
because
I agree.
they haven't figured out any way to attract new voters. They no longer have messaging that's resonating with anyone other than their base. JD Vance has already put a nail in their coffin by activating all of these women in America who have chosen not to have children or don't have children.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, the list just goes on and on and on about why Kamala Harris is going to be the president. And that's not to say people shouldn't vote or shouldn't be aggressive about this or be as enthusiastic. What it is that this election needs to be an indictment of Donald Trump, which means it's not enough to win.
no,
Win has to be the win has to be a landslide, because this is the way America says we want our country back and we will not have this anymore. It's like
I
we need
agree.
to bring the adults into the room and, deal with the petulant child, and he's got to go take a time out.
Absolutely. When you said using that term weird is destabilizing, that's exactly it. These people are known for calling names and being aggressive and being
Yeah,
in
it's their
people's face.
strategy. Yeah.
When that weird term came out, Marco Rubio tried to slap back at it. And I don't know if you heard this, but this is what he said. He said, "I can't believe they're calling us weird. I'll just call them weirder." That's what I would have done in high school. Well, that's why you didn't go to prom or got your ass kicked every day in high school, because you're not good at this.
Yeah, yeah. And
They don't
what's really
they,
interesting?
they don't know what to do when somebody pushes back, and that's my point with a bully.
That's exactly right.
That's how you
That's
stop them.
exactly right. Like the Wizard of Oz, you
Yeah,
call them out for what they're doing, and this is something that Democrats have refused to do, because the idea is if they go low, you have to go higher. But that's not how it works when you're dealing with these types of candidates. You
yeah,
have to hit them where it hurts, you have to hit them hard, and you have to hit them repeatedly in order to win. That's the only way you win. And this is the thing that the Democrats have finally understood, is that you have to coalesce around one thing. No splinter groups, no separate issues. We will get to dealing with all of the issues that everyone wants dealt with once we have the White House back.
right.
Once
Well,
we have the Senate, once we have the Senate, once we have the House of Representatives, once we have the presidency, that is when America is going to have a dramatic shift. And that's what it is exactly what needs to happen.
And think about it. All it took was 100 years and democracy hanging by a thread for the Democrats to figure it the fuck out.
Oh my God, it's been so frustrating. I think part of, I've been watching all of this for 40 years and as someone who has taught this stuff and watched this happen, I just scratch my head every election cycle and I see the messaging that comes out from the Democrats and I see how they respond. The Democrats have always been on the defensive because they always go to a place, and Joe Biden was notorious for this. Doesn't matter what anything said to him, he will always recount all of his accomplishments in office because he's thinking that if you just state the facts and you show what the accomplishments are, the American people will just naturally understand that this is the right person. And meanwhile, there's a battering ram hitting him in the head, and he's continuing to rattle off accomplishments and what he wants to do in his second term. It's like everyone's
Yeah,
looking at him saying, do you not realize that there's a battering ram slamming into the side of your head over and over and over here? And it's the same message. It's make America great again. And it's like, oh, well, we did this, we did this, we did this. That is not the moment that we are in. And it's very possible that we will never be in that moment
right.
again. This is the nature of our politics now, and you have to respond accordingly.
I'm convinced of any notoriety or success I get on TikTok, and the same would be said for you, is because in the Democratic Party, we were once unicorns in the sense that everybody acted, I'm going to go higher. And then when somebody who looks like me and talks like me, most people would say, that's a fucking Trump humping Republican. But then you hear what I say and you say, oh, this guy wants to fight. Finally, somebody wants to fight. And
Exactly.
I think that's what people are resonating with Kamala. Finally, we got a
Absolutely.
fighter.
Yeah. And I mean, she speaks like a fighter.
Yeah.
And you remember in that the election where she was debating Mike Pence, and he, in typical fashion is going to shut the woman down or attempt to shut her down while she's speaking. And she just turned and looked at him and said, I'm speaking.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you that one moment right there for women across America who have been talked over and mansplained and been dismissed by men, especially in the workplace, that landed. It didn't matter how you felt about Kamala Harris. That I'm speaking landed in a really huge way. And we don't forget that. And it is a way that we know that she will come out swinging. And I mean, for heaven's sake, she was trained. I mean, she's a lawyer, she's a trained prosecutor. She
Right.
knows how to deal with these things. She knows how to deal with anything that is said to her. And so that's why I'm saying, it's very dangerous for Donald Trump to attempt to debate her because, as I said before, she will eviscerate him. She's going to be like a sushi chef with him.
I always tell people one thing I've learned over the years that saved me a lot of trouble and it benefited me is so many people in this world are controlled by their emotions. When in fact
Completely.
it should be the opposite way. You should
Yeah.
control your emotions and use them as the tools they are. And they always would say years leading up to this point, oh, women are too emotional.
Yeah.
And the
Mhm.
thing with Kamala Harris, and I don't believe that's true, not anymore, but um, people may have got people to believe that at one time, but that's certainly not true. But that's the special sauce for Kamala. She's strong, she's direct, she's in control of her emotions. She's not a screeching woman. She's not somebody that's going to get unhinged. And there's nothing, what I found with narcissists is because I've run across them, they want to suck you into the fight, the yelling and screaming. And when you don't
Mhm.
get sucked into that, they're off balance. Instead, when
Yeah.
they say, well, you said this and you said this, and they go, yeah, I said that. Uh,
Yeah.
it throws them off. And she gets that. She understands that. And that's why she will eviscerate Donald Trump because she can control her
Yeah.
emotions and still take them apart. And she's got substance.
Absolutely.
He has none.
That's right. And I think you bring up a really great point because you rattled off a lot of characteristics like this trope that exists that, there's this screeching woman out there.
Right, right,
It's an old trope, but the thing is everything that you described about how she is are things that will resonate deeply with older white men who, for the most part, have voted for Donald Trump because she represents a certain kind of strength that these older white men don't see in women because they were not brought up to see women in certain ways. They see women in very specific ways, and Kamala Harris doesn't read like that. And as a result, they see they see a particular kind. They're looking for a fighter,
right.
and there were issues like the way that people did not like Hillary Clinton. People love how Kamala Harris is, and that is part of why she is like as we said at the top of the hour, it's like the planets have aligned, is
Right.
that she wasn't right then. She is absolutely right now because she's got the perfect combination of all things. And, the funny thing is how every time Trump's campaign comes out with a criticism of Kamala Harris,
It's a joke.
that the Harris campaign comes out with a press release that just shreds whatever it is that they're saying or makes them look weird. Like this whole thing about how she laughs is that, somehow that was supposed to be a bad thing. But what it does is it makes her human,
Right.
that she drops F-bombs here and there, that she's for all of the things that you described of her strength, and she's a fighter and she's a warrior. You see her with her stepchildren, you see her with her husband, you see her interacting with people just in public where there are people that she knows, and she warmly embraces them, and she dances and she loves to laugh. She has a good time. This is a woman who just, you know, she's got it all going for her, and she's bringing it all to the election in November, and we're going to get the benefit of her as our president.
Absolutely. Have you heard the latest one that Fox News is complaining about with her?
What is it?
She hugs people. She's always hugging people. I want to tell you a story. I've got a granddaughter who's 4 years old, and
Uh-huh.
and I always say, we need matching T-shirts that says a lot, and for me, a lot more, because we're kind of the same personality, which is hard to
Yeah.
imagine for a four-year old. But she'd always say to me, Grandpa, you be the monster and you chase me. So I'd be the monster and I chase her. And she'd get to a point where she'd really get scared. She goes, "No, Grandpa, stop. I'm scared." And I said, "Okay, yeah, we won't do that." And then she'd do it again and say, "You be the monster." I said, "Listen, I'll be the monster, but I'm going to be the hug monster. When I
Uh,
catch you, I'm going to hug you." She goes, "Okay, that's better." But
uh,
they're trying to make this out that she has human emotions and has a
yeah,
personality as a character flaw. And that just
yeah,
tells you the character flaw they're coming from.
absolutely. And it also tells you how they are misreading the American public.
Right,
I mean, there is a joy that Americans are feeling right now and is going to carry them into the voting booth in November because they feel like relief is on the horizon,
right,
and that we are going to go forward with our country in a way where people are taken care of properly, that we respect one another, that our standing in the world is going to be repaired and restored. It is unbelievable. I'm sure you have this on your TikTok account, the number of people from outside of the US
oh
that are
yeah,
tuned because of how much they're learning about this and what they're saying, and how many say to me, we're sitting here, especially the Canadians are saying, we're just sitting here holding our breath about what's going to happen
right,
because they're sitting right there and they are greatly affected by what happens in the US. And the whole world is affected by what happens in the US. And, for most Democrats, probably all, when Donald Trump got into office and how he has behaved throughout, it's like you just never want to use your US passport when you're traveling anywhere, and you definitely don't want to be having an American flag anywhere near you because they want to skewer you.
yeah,
Because how is it possible America could vote for somebody like this. It's inconceivable, it's incomprehensible. And so now, one of the very important things that will come out of this election when Kamala Harris is elected is that it will restore faith among our allies and countries across the world, uh, in that America has kind of had a reboot and everybody else can relax, which means things in the world start to settle down because, America, who pretty much dictates most everything that goes on in the world because they have the power to do so, uh, has itself calmed down. And so I predict that we're going to see a calming of things uh, as she moves into the White House and we start dealing with the issues that are going on in the world. You have to have a strong US president to make that happen, and that cannot be Donald Trump.
No. Well, and I will say this too, that the whole regaining credibility in the international theater was started by Joe Biden. He's helped that a lot since he's
That's
taken
right.
over.
Absolutely.
He's taken over.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you this. We've seen a couple of surprising things. When France was supposed to be conservative and it went Democrat,
Yep.
when Britain went more liberal, even in
Yeah.
Iran, some more liberal things. Do you see
Mhm.
that as a worldwide trend? I tend to think that those people went away from the conservatives because they were terrified of what they were seeing here in this country. And that started a trend because these people do come to me from Ireland, from Australia, go, we're terrified that Donald Trump's going to win. And in the news they get tells them he is going to win. And so
Yeah.
they're terrified, um, and they're witnessing what's going on in this country, which is a joke, really, and it's frightening. And that may be tending to get people worldwide to say, we got to get away from this conservatism.
Well, I think what I would say about that is that, there are many more countries who have dealt with much worse than Donald Trump, Germany
Certainly.
being one of them, and the countries surrounding Germany and the impact to them. Um, and you've had dictators, you know, around the world for a very long time, many of whom have been put in those positions by the American government.
Right. True.
Um, and so, we have to accept our own, we have to be accountable for our own actions of installing dictators in different countries.
Right.
What that is a whole separate topic and issue. But to your point about or question about is, what people in other countries seeing in the US having any influence over how they are voting. I don't think it's so much of that as it is the way in which those people are being affected by what's happening in their own countries that looks similar to this,
Right.
and that the voting public are saying no more. And I was shocked at what happened in France because I would have never anticipated that the vote would go in the way that it did, and also in the UK. And to me, it is a sign that the people have had enough and that they are going to take back their countries. They will not have people be in power that are doing things that are detrimental to the
Right.
public. I mean, in some countries, especially when their economies are suffering, there is a tremendous amount of unrest. And if you don't have a leader that can bring those people together and bring them to a place of hope again, that you have turmoil, tumult, you have a lot of rioting going on. You have, revolutions that take place where the people say, we've had enough. And I think in the US, that is exactly what's happening.
Right.
The groundswell of support for Kamala Harris. And the way that everything is pointing to her winning the presidency is the number of Republicans who are speaking out about the fact that they are going to vote for her because they've had enough, because they now realize the extent to which they have lost their own party. They want their party back. The Democrats want, what we want to be doing is fighting about tax policy. What's the better tax system?
Right.
What's the better way of doing this or that? Where we are all much closer to the center than we are today,
Right.
where the Democrats are still kind of, hovering around the middle to the center. And there's a fringe of Republicans that are so far to the right that it has just, and because Donald Trump is their horse in the race, it just is dragging everybody along with them. And the Republicans have no choice. It's like you look at, is this what you want? Do you want Donald Trump? Or are you going to say, let's take our party back? And the only way they can take their party back is to vote for Kamala Harris.
Right. Well, we're coming down toward the end of the show,
Hmm.
and I wanted to bring something up. I think you talked about it on TikTok. I get people all the time saying, "What about the polls? It's so close.
Yeah.
It's so close." And I always say, "Don't listen to the polls because we don't know who funds them. We don't know the questions they ask. We don't know who they're talking to or what the
Yeah.
process is." I said you could look at fundraising as a way to determine who the support is. Kamala got $310 million in the last few weeks. Donald Trump got 138 million. That tells you, and we don't even know if that's true. Uh,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
so people get fired up about the polls, and even now, when the polls are looking better for Kamala, I'm suspect of the polls. I don't think the polls play a role, and I tend to agree with you that we're going to see a very decisive, if not a landslide, election for Kamala Harris, and that wouldn't be reflected in the polls. How do you feel about the polls?
I agree with you. I don't put any stock or weight in the polls whatsoever. What I look at is we already know which states are going blue. We already know which states are going red.
But do
Everything comes
we?
down
But do
to,
we? Because
well, yes,
Florida,
California is always going blue. New
but we
York is always going
right,
blue.
but we would presume Florida would always be red, and that's up for debate right now.
Well, you know what, I would tend to disagree with that because what you
Okay,
would have to look at is you'd really have to break down the voting population. You'd have to break down, how many people are eligible to vote. You have to look at what is the voting, what percentage of eligible voters have voted over past elections. There are a lot of things that you have to look at when you're talking about whether or not a state is going to flip. And then you have to look at where the population's located. There are so many factors that determine these things that I don't believe that Florida will flip because I don't think, because you have to win the electoral vote in Florida.
right.
And I don't believe that there are enough Republicans in Florida moving over into the Kamala Harris area. You also have to factor in that there is a large um, uh, Latin population in South Florida that will vote for Donald Trump. That wasn't the case in the past because of the number of people who are now in certain parts of South Florida. There are a lot of moving pieces in Florida. And while we may be hopeful that Florida could flip, I don't believe that that's what's going to happen. And so what I see is that when you look at the states that are solid red and solid blue, you know exactly how many electoral votes are there. And then you look at the swing states. It all comes down to what is happening in the swing states that's going to determine who's going to win.
Now, let me throw this argument out to you, and there's a vast difference between you and I are on the same page on a lot of things, but you're an academic.
Mhm.
You look at facts, you know what's up, and I kind of get a sense about things. And
Yeah,
here's
yeah,
what
yeah, yeah. Fair enough.
here's what I would say. Most studies on anything political is based on history,
Hmm.
right? What's gone on in the past. I'm saying what we're seeing now, we've never seen in history. We've never
Agree.
seen Roe v. Wade being overturned. We've never seen women in despair because of what's going on here and being injured. I think that Roe v. Wade decision is the biggest decision. Florida has it on the ballot now. That's going to tend to bring out more people.
Yeah,
You also have a state that's a shit show right now. They can't get people to build houses. They've got insurance prices going over the they can't be happy with what's going on with the Republicans in control. And
yeah,
while historically it wouldn't make sense for them to flip like that, in these times when it's so crazy and we're seeing flips like Joe Biden losing, Kamala Harris winning decisively, that was a huge switch that nobody could have predicted. And it all had to do with the climate and the people's attitudes and their fears and stuff. So that's why I'm saying I can't say for sure that Florida would flip, but I could see the possibilities.
yeah. You know what? Let me just go back 1 second to your question about the polls because I don't think I really addressed that. And that is I don't put any stock and weight in any of the polls. Everyone has a poll, and there's no consistency across the polls. And as
No.
you say, they're funded by different people. The news media puts out polls, and how many people do they poll? Which people are they? In what states are they polling? So I never put any weight in any of the polls. Now, with respect to Florida and reproductive rights and so forth, Florida has a huge population of people who are no longer of
No.
reproductive age, but no, have lived through the time of trying, of Roe v. Wade coming into being, and then watching our rights being taken away. And so there are so many things you have to take into consideration about a state like Florida, where where you would have some sense of what direction it's going to go. And I don't think there is enough evidence yet. And I am actually starting to work on some numbers where I'm looking at these swing states and even whether or not there's a chance that a particular state could flip. I'm really looking at all of the data that I can put together that would tell me ultimately how many people have to move from the Republican side into the Democrat column, how many more people have to vote in order for Kamala to take it. So that's something I'm actually working on behind the scenes to determine, okay, we know that we need a groundswell of people moving into the voting booths, but where is it most critical for that to happen?
Right.
And what do we know right now and what is likely to happen? Because when you can really break down the math on this, because it all works out to the math, how many people actually voted and who were they and who did they vote for, you can actually predict what is going to happen in that state
Right.
if you start saying, okay, well, if we had a 10% increase in voter participation that looked like this, what impact would it have on the race? Because that makes it so much easier to deal with. Okay, how do we flip a state like Florida? Well, we need X number of people. They need to be African American. They need to be women, and we need 4% fewer voters on the Republican side. Like you can actually do the math in that way and come up with a projection for what happens in Florida, but we don't have enough data just yet.
I acknowledge that I know that I'm not only the guy half class the glass half full guy. I'm the guy that's brimming over the top because I believe in being positive about things and
Yeah.
looking at trends and oftentimes I'm wrong and oftentimes I'm right. I just try I'm reading people and I'm reading media and I'm reading what's going on,
Mm.
and possibilities. I'm certainly not educated in a traditional sense in this, so
Mm-hmm.
I defer to what you're saying. So here's what I want you to do, Arlene.
Mm-hmm.
You know my stance on this, and you know the
Yeah.
numbers and stuff like that. I want you to
Yeah.
find the fucking numbers to
Okay.
substantiate what I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm
Happy to
teasing
do
you.
that.
I'm teasing you. I'm pulling a Donald Trump here. Well, Arlene, I want to thank you for coming on. It's absolutely been a joy to have you on. I think the people, much like the other guests, will absolutely fall in love with you, and they can find you on TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
It's tell them how they can find you.
Yeah, it's Arlene Unfiltered.
Okay. Arlene Unfiltered on TikTok. And if you are on TikTok and you're not following her, I'm fucking embarrassed. Honestly, I'm embarrassed in
You
you
are so
folks.
lovely. Well,
Seriously.
it's just been such a pleasure, and it's so nice to be able to have an extended conversation about this
Yeah.
because on TikTok it's just you make a 5-10 minute video and people are commenting, but it is a real joy and luxury to be able to have an interactive back and forth conversation such as we've had, because there's so much that people can learn when you have these conversations go back and forth because, we have different opinions and observations about things, and everyone is bringing a different viewpoint to things. And it's important to factor all those into the entire equation because that is how you get a sense of what is actually happening and how are people feeling? What is the tenor out there? What is suggesting to you what is actually going to happen? And from day one, like from the day that it was apparent that Kamala Harris was going to be the person, I was certain that she was going to win, but the day that JD Vance, because it was just a few days later, if I remember correctly,
Right.
JD Vance said what he did about all the childless cat ladies. I knew he sunk the entire Trump campaign
Yeah, he
with
did.
that statement alone, and
Absolutely.
he's never walked any of it back. And so, yeah, they made that was a fatal error in picking JD Vance.
I'm sure you get this question. I get this question from Republicans all the time. You're
Mhm.
just a white guy, old white guy sitting in your living room. What do you hope to accomplish? What can you possibly do? And I always tell them, I don't know. I just feel like I have to do something. And what you and I and other people who do what we do is we're just starting the conversation,
Yeah.
fueling
Mhm.
the conversation so other people have other conversations. And that's kind of a that's how you create the groundswell of knowledge and just a perception. That's all we're trying to do is put it out there. And if we can
Yeah,
do it in a way where people want to listen, then hopefully they learn something and then they pass
that's
it
right.
along and then they pass it along. And that's all we can hope to do. I'm not going to change the election. It's all the people listening that are going to change the
Yeah.
election.
Yeah, absolutely. And the more educated people are about these things, the more of an impact it has in this election and all of the ones to follow. Because I think, your followers and my followers, given how we're talking about these things, are beginning to recognize how vitally important it is for them to be voting in their local elections.
Right.
And even to be running for office. A lot of people are like, I'm not a politician, but here, think about it. If you were running for the school board, and they had three positions on that school board in a town of, 5,000 people, and the vote tally is like 60 to 44, you don't have to be a politician. You just have to know enough people who will go out and vote for you
Right.
so
Right.
that you are representing the people who have the similar views to your own. And it's not a huge commitment of time. These people think politics are all about like the president. They have to travel to all these states and they can't be a politician and have a job and all this kind of stuff. Most of these politically elected positions, they're like they're not volunteer because you've been elected, but in many cases they don't get paid.
Right.
It's more a matter of there have to be people to make decisions on behalf of the rest of the people. And everyone has the ability to run for office. And the more of these offices are occupied by Democrats, the more things are going to move in a direction that are beneficial for all Americans. It doesn't
Absolutely.
work that way on the other side when you have a lot of Republicans in those offices because they view things very, very differently than Democrats do.
Absolutely. Again, Arlene, thanks for coming on. I want you to come back as soon as you're ready to come back. I do a show every day, so it's not hard to get in the schedule. I mean, we're
Oh,
getting more
brilliant.
people want to be on the show, and that's great. But when we can educate folks like you did here today, that's incredibly invaluable.
Well, it's very, very much my pleasure. I'm so honored that you asked me to come on your show. And
Well, it's not that big a deal. I'm just an old white guy sitting in the living room.
well, I feel honored. Thank you. And I will come back when I have been working up my numbers, where I get more of a sense of what is happening, especially in the swing states. The
Absolutely.
news stations all do their analysis, and other people are crunching numbers and so forth. And I'm crunching my own, and I will probably be looking at some different things than other people. So you listen to a lot of different people, hopefully you can trust the people you're listening to. And what I would say to, any of your listeners is that, really pay attention. Like at the top of the hour, we are talking about that Rachel Maddow segment, and anything you're watching on TV, you have to be really listening closely and watching, do they have the set? It's all lit in a dark way. And,
Yeah.
and the tone of voice that people are using, if they're not just talking like regular people, then there's like they're trying to create a feeling in you that is not consistent with the reality. And a lot of it has to do with producing fear in people
Yeah.
and get you to come back and continue listening. But that's not, I feel like it's totally irresponsible. So I think, you and I are talking in ways that can leave people feeling more comfortable and rest easier at night, knowing we have a lot of work to do. We're going to do that work and we're going to bring it home in November, and we're going to bring it home in huge, huge numbers
Yeah.
because he needs to be indicted by the American people. So thank you again for this. I really appreciate the opportunity and the luxury of this amount of time.
Well, it was an absolute pleasure, and I know the folks will love it. You want to check the comments in the YouTube part of it because they'll absolutely love you, and they'll have a lot of
Oh,
questions
oh,
for you too. So
oh, lovely.
for those of you listening, I want to thank you for taking the time to do that. I hope you have a great day, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.